listeners. Can I try this in a different voice? It's like Bill Clinton or something. Hello, fellow randoms. My name is Kev Duffy, and this is let me make sure I'm counting it right, 9th episode of What's Your Random Podcast, where I discover... Wait, I wrote a better one. Rewind. Yep. Welcome to What's Your Random Podcast, where I discover and celebrate individual and independent creativity from the inception of an idea to the process of bringing it to life. Boom. That's what we do here. And before I introduce my guest today, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you. Go ahead, accept the thanks. You deserve some gratitude. Let it soak in. And while you let it soak in, if you can please subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. And while you're at it, and if you're willing, give us a rating on iTunes. It goes a long way to help us grow the podcast and spread the word. And what helps more in spreading the word than sharing? If you enjoy this episode, vet it first. Listen to it. If you enjoy it, share it. If you share it, that really helps us build our audience, which is our main goal in this, our pilot season of What's Your Random. We are on episode 9 today, and I'm still hungry for a full 20 within 2020, this being our pilot season. I think it's doable. And it's even more doable if you give me the motivation of letting me know that you're listening. So holler at us at What's Your Random on Instagram and Twitter. And finally, hang on after the end of the episode for my debriefing, where I talk about key takeaways from the episode and a little bit of analysis on how I think I can do better moving forward. Without further ado, my guest today is Kip Benjamin, aka at Ipkipi. Yes, Ipkipi, Ipkipi. Kip is an illustrator and a comic book creator, and they have just released their first comic into the world, a volume of 130 pages, a very ambitious project called Heaven's Not Enough. If you don't know about it, make sure you check it out because it's really quite an accomplishment in illustration and most impressively in storytelling. So what else do I have to say? This was a great conversation. It was funny. We giggled, we laughed, we talked about tough issues like the anxiety you have to overcome to pursue a big project like this. And Kip was very forthcoming and open, and I appreciate very much their straightforwardness and their willingness to open up about their process and the journey of the past year that was creating Heaven's Not Enough. So my fellow randoms, Kip Benjamin, aka Ipkipi. Hello, Kip Benjamin, and welcome to What's Your Random?
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have you. And first and foremost, congratulations on your extremely successful Kickstarter that just concluded not too long ago. And before we dive in and I start asking questions, I want to make sure I avoid spoilers. So you could introduce yourself and then introduce the story, and that will kind of provide the boundaries in which we have a discussion.
Sure. I'm Kip. I wrote and illustrated and everything else the comic Heaven's Not Enough, which I started working on last November, and I finished it this October that's just passed. And then I immediately threw it up on Kickstarter, and the campaign, I put it up with a goal of £300, and the campaign finished on the 11th of November at about £8,400.
Yeah, I did the math. That's 28 times what you were asking for.
So the comic basically is based off of a dream that I had last year. It's about Mars and Bailey, a couple who have just woken up and they're stood at the foot of a big, glorious, clean-looking building, and there's kind of nothing else around them for miles other than like some forests and grasslands and stuff like that. And they go into the building, and later, after a couple of discussions, find out that they've actually died and that this is heaven and this is where they'll be staying from now on. And the comic is basically them going around and exploring, I suppose, the limitations of heaven, which is not a lot, and basically just adjusting to their new life and deciding what's right for them and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's much more than that in terms of its exploration of emotion. And I don't want to just congratulate you on a successful Kickstarter, but I read the comic and it's really impressive. It's a great story. The art is beautiful, and even more so than just the art, the storytelling and your ability to convey, I think, what you wanted to convey was done so with a level of artistry. So congratulations on that as
Thank
well.
you so much. That's incredibly flattering. I will ask. I have been asking this to my proofreaders and other people who have read it early. I don't know if you are a crier, but did you cry?
It definitely influenced the tear ducts in my eyes a bit. Yeah, for sure. And I read that comment on your Kickstarter. I guess a friend of yours or an editor read it and said that. What was the comment exactly? Do you remember?
I believe word for word is you are going to cry like a lot.
Like a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
And I read that before I read the comic itself, and I was like, okay, that person must be emotional, emotionally charged.
He is quite, yeah. But to be fair, yeah.
I think I'm relatively easily emotionally triggered as well. But that being said, it was not overt in the way that it would trigger emotion. I think you did so much with ambiguity, and particularly like the silent communication that humans have. And I think that's really difficult to convey on a written page. It's even difficult to convey in animation or video, and to be able to convey that in a comic is one of the things that I was most impressed about. Your use of silence to convey a story. So I don't know if you could talk about that aspect of writing and illustrating.
Yeah, that's a very incredibly thoughtful comment. Thank you. I feel like it's funny because I almost felt the opposite when I started writing, because generally, most situations I'm quite a quiet person myself, particularly to strangers. So, especially when I was writing, because it was my first time writing such like a long, consistent plot, I guess, or my first time writing any sort of comic. So I found dialogue particularly hard, and I found it hard to make the actual written dialogue quite natural. Because I feel like if I'm talking to people or if I'm watching animation or stuff like that, the one thing that I do notice is the what body language tells us, and, things like that. So that part was actually quite the natural part for me, and the actual written dialogue was the thing that I was really struggling with, and going to people like, does this sound right? Do people actually say these things? Is it not forced or anything like that? But yeah, that's interesting that you think that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a point in the story too where there's empty communication bubbles. I won't say at what point in the story, but you're giving the audience an opportunity to fill those bubbles in for themselves. And there's a lot of gesturing in that one scene in the comic.
Yeah.
So, maybe you're coaching people along in terms of, what they could fill those bubbles in with.
Yeah.
But that was really a
That's a
creative
part
approach.
yeah, so that's a part of the comic where there's these, yeah, so like the characters are speaking and they have these dialogue bubbles, but you don't see what that's being said.
Right.
And it's just there's something about that scene where I couldn't see it as anything other than silent and private, because the scene itself is like so it's something so personal and a very like emotional moment that like I don't. Oh, it's very difficult to word. This is what I mean about dialogue. It's so difficult to word these things sometimes. But it just didn't feel right writing in whatever this personal conversation that they're having is. It felt like that was something for those characters and those characters alone.
Yeah. So did you have an idea originally of some dialogue that you wanted to insert into those bubbles of that particular scene? And did you play with having words versus not having words? And at what point did you decide to have empty bubbles?
Um, I mean, no, to me it was always just empty words. It's weird because this story was based off of a dream. Uh, there was a lot in that dream that was like fully kind of fleshed out. Well, I suppose it's the same as any other dream where you see things, but not everything's like 100%. You know, you can't really hear what other people are saying. You just kind of get the vibe of what happened and the things you saw and stuff like that. So there was a lot that I needed to flesh out in, you know, in terms of environment, characters, and all that. And what actually happens in the flow of the story. Like there are bits that I put in and filled in. There are bits that I completely left out because they didn't make sense at all. But that video part was true to the dream. Like that was a thing that I thought like, oh, you could. I'm spoiling it. I only just realized that I said.
That's okay. I wanted to tell you if I didn't tell you by email too. If there's a part in this where we end up spoiling something and you look back and you're like, oh no, as long as it's before I post it, I could go back and cut it out.
Yeah, it's funny. I've just read it so many times now that I'm like, oh yeah, everyone knows what happens in it. I was like, oh no, I've just released it today. What am I doing? No, but there's a part in that scene was like true to what happened in the dream. So like I don't remember any. It was all very dream style, so I don't really remember any of the actual dialogue of it. But it just works so well without any. Anyway, it was funny to me that like there was so much dialogue I needed to flesh out to make things seem natural, but the one thing that I really couldn't think of any dialogue for was the one thing that just worked perfectly with no dialogue.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was very satisfying.
Yeah. I think that was one of the most satisfying parts of the comic, and because the facial, you could really feel the emotion, and you get to focus on the emotion of the characters and the art and the way that you're drawing their gestures and things like that. And I think that ends up telling a much deeper story than any words could tell. So it shifts for me as a reader, it shifted my attention to the emotion. Which was it was an awesome creative choice on your part, whether it was
Thank you.
100% intentional or just straight from the dream or not.
It's incredibly emotional story. I think that's just the one word that just sums the entire experience up. Like I was having trouble writing it because there are parts that were like, oh, this feels weird that it's coming from me.
Why would you say that?
Well, because I mentioned it in the afterwards in my comic, but when I was writing it, I had like I was going through a bout of some terrible anxiety, and particularly health anxiety, which was it's something I kind of feel every now and again, which is just like, you know, the tiniest thing goes wrong with you, and you're like, what if this is something much bigger? Which, especially now in a pandemic, you know, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are feeling like that. But the comic is, again, based on a dream. But originally in the dream, it was me and my boyfriend who had died and gone to heaven. So I was like, wow, this whole concept, this whole story that's just come into my head overnight is perfect. And I've always wanted to write a comic. I should write this down now and start making it. And I was writing it, and I was like, it, it was so weirdly painful to put it all down on paper and think like this was me, but like it wasn't me. So it was strange. It was very strange, but very difficult to write. But I'm really glad I did write it.
Yeah. Was it therapeutic in some way? Like, I mean, it may, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. Because it was like conquering a fear, you know? Yeah. So, yeah, when I was straight up writing a comic about, um, about myself dying while I was going through a horrible bout of, like, am I actually dying? So, so it really was overcoming something. And, yeah, I guess especially since it was a very long process, I had like a long time to kind of uh, battle with that anxiety and with like putting this all on paper. And at the same time, it kind of gave me like an outlet, like something else to focus on when I was feeling rubbish, you know?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Mm.
Yeah. So you're focusing on something else, but at the same time leaning at least a little bit maybe into your anxiety and challenging it.
Yeah, challenge it. That's totally the word for it. Yeah, because oh, there were so many times where I was just writing it out, and I was like, this bit, like especially early on when I was just thumbnailing out the story, I was like, this is just so weird. Because originally the characters were me and my boyfriend, and that was probably the hardest part to see, um, especially when I was thumbnailing out that no dialogue scene that we were talking about. And it wasn't until I really started to flesh out more of the plot and start to give characters like more conflict and such like that, that I was like, I can't see this as myself or my partner. It's just really not right. Like it's not us. It has to be purely fiction to me, I think. And I think that was a big part of like separating that anxiety for me. Like it really kind of drew it away, and it made working on the comic so much easier.
Yeah, I think if you are making something at least semi-autobiographical, then you have limitations because you know your own history and your own story. And
Mm,
you might want to write something in, but then you say, oh, that's not true of me. How could I lie about myself in
yeah, that
the
was exactly it.
representation of
Yeah,
myself in the story? So
for sure.
that's
Yeah.
at what point in, so it took you basically a year from start to successful Kickstarter, which is also amazing for an ambitious project. So the comic itself is over 100 pages,
Yeah, the plot
right?
itself is 130. Yeah.
Yeah. So back to my, so that's also, I applaud you for that, because that's a, you know, I think a lot of people spend about that much time on a 23-page single issue, and this is a volume, and it reads very quickly. I mean, I saw that it was 100 pages and I was like, okay, I need to set aside some time to read this, because I have a little bit of like ADD. I can't sit down in one
Mm,
place for too long.
yeah.
But I sat down and it was done in like a matter of minutes. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's done already. I want more, but at the same time, it's perfect as it is. One of those sorts of reads. But back to my question, I guess, is at what point in writing it and in that course of the year and in the process of writing the story did you separate yourself, and make these characters independent of you and your boyfriend?
That would have been. That's a good question. So it was the process was kind of like I thumbnailed it in a bunch of sketchbooks, just tiny little scribbles like that with dialogue, and just general thumbnails of what the panels and scenes were going to look like. And then I brought that onto my computer and I did digital sketches of every page. And then like I went in and cleaned up all these pages, and then I did the line art and then the coloring and all that. And I think it was sometime during the digital process, so it was a decent way in. Um, it was probably like sometime in between like the first and second bout of digital sketching. It was when I was starting to add in little bits and pieces that were kind of missing from the story to like flow naturally or actually feel like something is happening. And I started to add a kind of conflict with one of the characters, Mars, that is kind of woven throughout the story. And the first time this thing that happens to them kind of comes up and they react to it in a bit of an outlandish way, that's the point where I was like, this just isn't me anymore. I just have to like break this off completely because it's just not me anymore.
Yeah, that's cool, and it's I think it's testimony to like the story writing process that even after you think you're pretty much done with a story, like you said, you already had drafted pretty much all of the art, and I guess based on that, you pretty much had the story fully written, right? But the story was still evolving at that point.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, more or less, I had like all the visuals down in my head, if nothing else. So I knew what all the everywhere they went looked like, and that was like the clearest point to me. So I was like, okay, well, I know what this looked like and what we did here, so I can just like weave in and out between these scenes and like write in the dialogue. But I put it all down on paper, and I was like, this just needs so much more, you know. This is literally like hearing someone's wacky dream. It's not like reading a story.
Yeah. So how did you create the arc of the story, and at what point was that a conscious process? Yeah, I guess if you could go into a little bit, you could go into as much detail as you want in terms of like your creative process and developing the story, because it's really succinct and in the end has a lot of layers woven into it that I picked up on, which I assume many were intentional. And
Oh, I wouldn't be so sure.
maybe I'm reading into things too much.
I don't know. It's weird because the whole process has been such a blur for me. It's weird to me that a year ago, because this whole thing started like, there's this convention here called Thought Bubble, which is like a big UK comic convention, like tons of big comic artists, indie comic artists. It's just, it was the best convention I went to last year. It was so nice, just really love the atmosphere. And I was lucky enough to table there because someone had dropped out last minute, and then I wriggled my dirty hands into it. But I didn't have any like comics or that to show off. It was just like all artwork and merchandise and stuff like that. And I was looking around when I was taking breaks from my table. I would look around and look at all the different comics. And I even had friends who would table them there with comics and zines and stuff like that. And I was like, this is all just, it's incredible to me. It's such an incredible world. Just it's something I'd always wanted to do, and seeing all of these incredible comic artists in one place and like friends of mine showing off their comics and stuff, I was like, this is something I've never even broken into before, but I'd love to, but I don't know where to start. I don't have anything. I don't have a story. And then I went to sleep, and that night I had the dream.
Wow.
Yeah. And I woke up, I was like, well, I've got to now, basically. But like that was over a year ago now, and it's weird to me that it's all gone so quickly, especially when there are times when I was writing it and drawing it out where I was just like, this could not go any quicker. Like this is going to take me forever, you know, you know. But it's all been such a blur that I'm still at the point where I'm like, I don't even know what happened the past year. Like, I feel like maybe in a few months or like 5 months from now or whatever, I'm going to think, oh yeah, like last March I was writing this part and thinking like, oh, what am I going to do with this and that and this.
But right now you're still like kind of euphoric.
I'm just like, oh, yeah, you know. It's like when you get off like a really fast roller coaster and just for a bit your hair's like on ends and you're just kind of walking around not knowing what to do next. But the most I can really think of is there were a lot of times when I did get quite stuck writing the story and all that, because there were days, especially towards the end of the process, where it was all I would work on day in and day out. And most of the time, all I did was, it was quite miraculous, really. I would go out, if I was stuck, I'd go out and I'd go for a walk, and like my boyfriend would come with me, and he would like talk to me and tell me about his day and just stuff like that and what he'd been up to. And we would just walk, and I would just listen and not think about the comic. And by the time I got back, I was like, oh, obviously I need to do this. And it all felt like the process just came so unreasonably naturally that it's so strange to think about it now and look back on it.
Yeah, yeah. And those, I had a podcast with a Argentinian comic book writer and author, and he kind of made a similar comment that sometimes whenever he feels stuck, he just needs to go outside for a
Mm.
moment and hit
Yeah,
the
it does. It's
reset
incredible. It
button,
does wonders. Yeah,
right?
it's amazing.
Yeah. And when you went into the process of writing the comic, was it just a matter of, it seems like you would sit down, I mean, from listening to you up until this point, you would sit down and like the pages would pour out of you. Was there an actual practice, like a regiment to, okay, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to do this, and pushing yourself to produce, or were you just in a zone where you were doing it? I mean, was there any guidelines to keep you on task?
Uh, Towards the well, at the beginning of it, it was more quite loose. Like, well, I think when it started, and when I actually started writing it all down, thumbnailing all my sketchbook, we were on holiday, so I definitely didn't have a schedule then. And it was pretty much just like it was a strange feeling because I feel like I had been basically begging myself to come up with a story idea, and then it happened. So I was like, well, I've definitely got to do something about it now. So there was definitely like that pressing voice in the back of my mind that was like, you have this, don't lose this. Um, so that being said, even while we were on holiday, I was like, I've got to do something about this. I've got to put it down. So at the start of it, it was just because I didn't know when it would be done or like how it would go, how other people would see it, if it was any good or anything like that. So at the start, it was just get out what I can and see where the process takes me, because I know nothing about comic making or writing a story or whatever. So just write out what I have and see what comes after that, and like, read it and compare it to the stuff that I've read and think like, what's missing here. So at the start it was just like sketch out a few pages, and then I finished all the thumbnailing. I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I remember when I finished the thumbnailing, because when I started it, it was just like, oh, do a couple pages here and there, flesh out the characters that you saw and the places that you went and stuff like that. And then there came a day when I thumbnailed like just bear in mind, tiny little scribbles like that and some dialogue. I thumbnailed about like 50 pages in one day. And I was just like, all right, okay, this is actually something now that I can move the process up, and it just really kind of snowballed from there. And there was definitely towards the end of it, when I finished all the line arting and I was moving on to coloring, when I was like, okay, I'm going to do like at least this much every day, and just, yeah. And it just really, really snowballed.
That's awesome. And then, so this was your first comic, right?
Yeah.
And had you done any short like web comics before, or anything, that was
The
created a narrative at all?
the most I had done was I run a Patreon with my friend Kel. He was the one who wrote that review that was like, you're gonna cry a lot. We have a Patreon together where we post artwork and stuff like that, and our latest works in progress. And we used to do daily comics for it, which was so difficult to keep up with. um, we did it for about a year though, which is quite an accomplishment. We're thinking about making like some little remastered collections out of them. But the most I had, yeah, that was like the most I had done of comics before that was just like, oh, little things that happened in my day, 3 or 4 panels of the silly little comments or things that had happened. And yeah, that was it.
And then how do you make the jump from that to a over 100-page comic? Like,
Oh,
where
jeez.
where did you learn the process, and how much of it was creating your own style? So I do a decent amount of video editing, and sometimes I think about, and it's been very much self-taught, and I live in my own bubble in terms of editing process and organization of files and stuff like that. So I'm really curious about other creators, if they're following any sort of standard, and if you followed a standard, if you created your own standard, and if you learned stuff, where you learned it from. So if you could elaborate on that.
Well, most of my learning of comics and structures like that, I suppose, came from reading other people's comics. And that was the main thing I wanted to take away when I was writing it, was because, I had never written a comic before. I didn't really know the first thing about how it was structured, so that was one thing I definitely wanted to learn. The only thing that I wanted to keep really true was the story and like everything that happened and all that. So it was mainly just like reading off of other people and just trying to notice what they did and how they make a story flow.
Yeah, that's good advice. I think is sometimes you don't need to take a class. You could just kind of take points of reference that inspired you, and things that you like, and learn from them. Yeah, interesting. I had a question and I lost it. So if I ever look down to the side, it's because I do have notes, and I take notes as I chat. So I think, if I remember correctly, that you referenced Naruto in the comic,
Oh god, I forgot about that.
right? So yeah.
Yeah, there's a point. There's a point where there's a video being played, and Mars sees it, and they're like, this reminds me of those old like Naruto AMVs, like those really terrible ones that have like Evanescence songs and shit like that in the background. I just thought that was like a really funny thing to reference because the whole story is so personal, and when I wanted to write in something silly there, I was like, well, I'm not backing down now. I'm gonna make this even more personal. Naruto was such a big thing when I was growing up. I was like, oh, that was everything to me. Were you a big Naruto person, or were you like one of the Bleach people or One Piece people?
No, I hate Bleach.
I couldn't get into it.
It's I think it's an amalgamation of other better animes, in my personal view.
Someone's gonna get very angry in the comments.
I know. I lived in New York until last year, and I used to go to a Japanese film festival every year, which is still like my favorite event of every year. It's canceled this year, obviously, or actually done online. But I always buy the full movie pass, and some summers I would see 30 movies in the
Oh my god.
in the course of 10 days at this festival. And one year they played the live action Bleach movie.
There's a live action.
There is, yeah. It must be 2018 or 19 that it was made.
That's so recent.
Yeah, it's quite new.
Is it any good?
Well, it's Bleach. So.
Say no more.
The movie is not terrible, but it brought out all the Bleach fans, and I was like, oh man, like people really love it. And I don't begrudge them, but I guess I just don't get it. Don't get
that was one of the ones I could never get into.
I was more, I would rather watch Yu Yu Hakusho again, I think, which is like
I haven't seen that one.
Spirit-based one. It's a throwback shonen one. Yeah, I'll date myself a little bit. I think I was in college. I was in junior year of high school, and Naruto was first coming out.
God,
like
I don't even know when Naruto came out.
the original one. So it must be, Naruto must have come out 2002, 3, 1.
2002. Oh, I was in primary school. I was a little baby.
At least you were born. I don't feel too old. But yeah, I was pretty into Naruto, but I get overwhelmed when series are really long because I can't keep up,
Yeah.
and then to re-engage becomes such an investment of time.
I didn't realize how long it was until I guess I started watching it when I was like much later after it came out, when I was like 12 or 13 or so. I didn't realize how long it was until like I got into Shippuden, I think, and I tried watching it and I was like, there's like 500 more of these. I can't do this.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah, I only
you're of a
properly
similar
finished it like
mindset.
yeah. I only properly finished it like watching it start to finish like a couple years ago. It's a lot
Yeah.
shorter without all the fillers.
Yeah. You gotta read a guide to definitely cut those out because I think that's the case.
It's never good when someone's like, "Oh, you should watch this show. Here's a guide on how to watch it."
Skip these 3 seasons.
It's
You'll
yeah.
get it.
I'd be that way.
Yeah. But I was curious if how anime influenced your storytelling or I mean, I think maybe most obviously it has a impact on your art style and not just in this comic, maybe less of an influence, but some of the art on your Instagram. And if you think that it influenced you. Yeah. What do you
I do
think?
think so a little bit. Yeah, because I mean, I've always been drawing like ever since I was 11 or 12 or so, and definitely back then anime had like a huge influence on my style, but I could never get it right. It was really frustrating to me, and as I got
What about it was not like I'm doing air
uh,
quotes for people listening. What was not right?
the proportions, I just couldn't get it right. It's like the tiny little skinny faces with the pointy chins and the big eyes. I could just never ever get it right. It was so frustrating to me. Yeah, but I would still do it. And it wasn't until I was like 14, 15 when I started to develop my own art style and like branch away from that. And I've only really started to like look into more kind of anime-ish art styles like in the past year or so again because I feel like much more experience now because it is fun as hell to draw like big overly proportions like blown out uh, weird stick figure cartoon people. It's just so fun and it's really refreshing if you're like me and you've been doing like a lot of painting and like very involved pieces that take a very long time to draw. And then you're just like, oh, I want to draw just some cartoony shit, just some fun anime. So it was definitely one of the reasons I started. Oh, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, it's my dry. Oh, never mind. My boyfriend's got it.
Yeah.
It was one of the reasons that I started learning how to draw because I would go on DeviantArt and obviously Naruto OCs are all the rage back then. So I was like, oh, I want to do that too. Got started with my with like pen and pencil, but then obviously you move on to the much superior MS Paint. And it all just went downhill when I got my first tablet. Yeah. So yeah, anime was just, especially when I was starting out, it's a huge influence for me. And
Yeah.
people find that like cringy sometimes, but it's like it's fun. It's funny. It doesn't really matter where your inspiration comes from.
Yeah, and I think people kind of shun anime, but I mean, and some anime is shunnable in terms of its production value and the amount they invest in the art. But then you have stuff like Devilman Crybaby, off the top of my head,
Mm.
um, and among others that are like kind of bring high art, in my opinion, to anime. I
Mm.
think, the design and the approach to stylization is so unique, that it becomes something beautiful and a work of art in and of itself. So yeah,
Yeah.
I like to think about, so I spent some time in Japan myself, and I've been long influenced by Japanese culture, including anime. And I like to think about this kind of ping pong ball of art and culture that people theorize. I don't know if it's a proven to be true, but that anime started with Betty Boop during World War II times, and that was kind of the you know Japanese woodblock printing art and Betty Boop as like the origins of what became manga and then what became anime, and
Mm.
then how anime and manga eventually ended up becoming a major export from Japan back to the Western world. So I like thinking about this like ricochet effect of art and culture and mediums, and
Mm.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
cool. It's cool to see how it has influenced you and other artists.
Yeah. Yeah. Stuff like that makes me wonder, like, if anything I create would ping pong back to someone else who would then make something, greater, and that would go to someone else, you know?
Yeah, I think it's extremely likely.
I can only hope.
I mean, so how many countries are you going to be shipping to when you start to fulfill on your pledges?
Most of them are UK and US, but there's some Australia. There's a lot of places around Europe. So I've got like France, I've got Ireland, Scotland. There was someone in Israel who bought it. There's one Japanese person who bought it.
Oh, there you go. There's your in.
I've done it. Yeah, there's quite a few. It's more than I normally see because I have like an online store as well, and people tend to buy from that. Yeah, what I used to do was last year when I was tabling at conventions for the week after it, I would like put up a bunch of merch, but like only for that week, and then I would close it off again. And during those times, you'd see like a lot of different people, like the US and Australia and stuff like that. But there's like way more with this. It's just like some very interesting places that I wouldn't expect to reach, you know?
Yeah. It's the internet is a mysterious and beautiful thing. I mean, and we're using it right now to communicate
Yeah.
across the ocean too. Um, yeah. So I think we kind of talked about how you started art, and then tabling at conventions, and then the comic. Can you talk a little bit more about the period of when you started to sell and make merch, and how long you did that, what led you into that, how you became a person who is making a living, or at least a part of your income off of your creativity, and exactly what your merch was and what markets you were selling into and who your audience was,
Mm.
before the comic. I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah. Yeah. So uh, it was all quite seamless going into art. Like it was something I'd always been interested in and something I had always studied. Because I know, I know a lot of people. Like I have a lot of friends who will like go to school and study one thing and then realize, oh, actually, I don't want to do that, which I think is quite common. Like there were plenty of things that I wanted to do when I was growing up, but art just kind of like uh, dominated over it in the end. I think. So like
What were
after
those
I,
other things?
oh, I studied English when I was in sixth form because I was thinking about writing actually, but I wanted to I wanted to be a critic. I didn't really have much of a idea or direction with where I wanted to take that, but I was just like, well, I've always enjoyed like the like opinion pieces they set us to write, like critical writing and shit like that. Um, it sounds so weird to talk about. It's like, oh, I always enjoyed airing out my opinion onto poor, unsuspecting people. Um, but yeah, it was just like, oh, one of the embarrassing ones when I was like 16. I wanted to be a comedian. I wanted to be an improv comedian, um, which requires a lot more practice. Oh, that was a weird
Did,
time in my life.
did you attempt any stand up?
Not stand up, but I was in an improv group for a while. It was mostly like I was only on stage with them like once or twice, and most of it was just like going to their practice groups and practicing with them. Um, they weren't like I come from like a quite a small town in England, and so there wasn't like a whole lot going on. If I wanted to do like proper improv classes, I'd probably have to ride out to like the next biggest city. But thankfully, though, I was very lucky. There was actually like an improv group of people who were much older than me, um, who were like meeting up every Wednesday, like on the top floor of a pub, just to like do a couple of bits and scenes, and like they would perform plays sometimes, and it was good fun. But I kind of it was like during one of my summer holidays at school. Um, so when I like actually got into sixth form, I like couldn't really keep up with it anymore. I just started getting like tired after every day. So I was like, oh, I don't want to do another thing today. Um, so I dropped it. Unfortunately, I also wasn't the most confident person growing up. Definitely not by a long stretch. So it was something that kind of wore me down emotionally every week.
Mm.
I think if it was something I tried now, I think I'd be a lot better off with it confidence wise. And I think I would still get a little bit nerve wracked, but it wouldn't just wipe me out for the rest of the day if I did it. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but I think it was quite a valuable experience, though. It definitely wasn't the kind of thing I'd do without any sort of like um, outside pressure's not the right word. I actively wanted to go, but like
Nobody was forcing you
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah,
gunpoint to go.
yeah. No, it wasn't something I would have tried if I didn't have like teachers or my mum or anyone being like, oh, this is like there, and it's quite lucky that it's there. So give it a go. Um, but yeah, literary careers, and then my uh, short-lived career as an improv comedian. Um, Art just kind of outweighed it, and I started taking commissions quite early on, but obviously I didn't get very many. It was just like your average Tumblr commissions where they're extremely underpriced, and I didn't have much of a reach back then, but it was a good start. It's something I'm quite glad I started doing early on, and it gave me a little bit of pocket money while I was still a teenager. And from there, I went to uni where I did 3D art, like video game art and stuff like that, which was really cool. And I picked up more commissions and like started doing more commission work in my third year of uni. And then after that, I worked elsewhere for like a year where I then moved in with my partner where I did art full time. And the tabling conventions and stuff only started last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was the influence from that really was growing up. I had always gone to a lot of conventions, being a big anime fan. So that was something I quite enjoyed a lot already. It's just such a great scene to be in conventions because like 90% of the people you walk past are like in the same mindset as you.
Right, right.
Yeah. And I have an artist friend who started tabling like couple years before I did, and was always talking about it. So I was like, oh, I kind of want to get into it, but I don't really know where to start. It's a huge investment money wise, because you got to buy the table and you got to buy like all your equipment, you got to buy all the prints and stuff like that. And they were like, "Oh, I can. I'm doing a convention in a couple months, but a friend of mine is selling that table. It'll be right next to mine. You can buy it if you want." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And it was a really cheap table too, so it was quite a good start.
Mm.
But yeah, I miraculously broke even on my first con, which I wasn't expecting to do because there's so much of an investment, especially on your first one. But I just barely did it, and it started off as prints, just artwork prints, and what else did I have? I think I had Koroks. I made little plushies of Koroks from Zelda, the little nut boys.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
shouldn't I
yeah.
shouldn't call them little nut boys.
Nut boys.
The little grass dudes who like pick up a rock and they're like, yeah ha ha. I made little plushies of them, and they sold really well. So I still make them. And then on my next one, I started to branch out into stuff like keychains and the badges and stuff. Stuff that you normally see at like artist convention tables. So audience is a good question because I don't feel like I've tried to cater to anyone specifically. It's just whoever will have it.
Yeah. And what were you doing for your portfolio up until that point? Are you like actively drawing on a daily basis, or is it more passive?
Yeah, well, I'm self-employed full time now with art, so I'll take on commissions and sell stuff in my store and um, do conventions when I could. So yeah, it was pretty much drawing every single day, and I've seen like obviously like a massive improvement since I started doing that. Drawing every day was like something I tried to do when I was back in sixth form, like when I was 16 or so too, because I was like, well, I'm really into art and I want to improve, so I should just draw every day. Not so easy when you got other things going on. Like if you got school going on and stuff like that, it's so hard, and it's not reasonable to expect yourself to be creatively available, I suppose, and to have that energy to pour into art, to pour in like a brand new piece of art every day. It's just not reasonable. I'm extremely lucky to be able to do it every day, and it's the only being self-employed and doing art full time is the only way I feel like I could ever draw every single day. It's just not reasonable otherwise. It's such a commitment.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are listening, or including myself, just had a little sigh of relief because I do have a 9 to 5 quote unquote normal standard sale job, and I have this, and then I have a couple of other creative endeavors, and sometimes I feel like I'm drained, and it's hard to put energy
Mm,
into what you were talking about, like the daily practice of drawing every day
mm.
when you have other stuff going on. So I think a lot of people probably heard that and were like, oh, that's really nice to
That's
hear that, I could give myself a break. I don't have to be so hard on myself for, not having energy every day to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
Trying, but not having the
I mean,
energy.
yeah, I mean that sounds like you've got quite a lot. Oh no, like how many people do you talk to like in a week?
So I'm relatively new to podcasting. I've been doing 1 week, I think I had 4, and now I'm shooting for like 2. And when all is said and done, I would like to have 2 episodes being released a week, at least one, but I think 2 would be really ideal in terms of capturing an audience and, having some sustained regularity to the show.
Mm,
Um, yeah. So, but for me, the podcast is actually great because I'm a pretty social person, but I was trapped inside, not just because of the pandemic, but just because of my lifestyle. It was hard to interact and meet new people, and I was just going about my daily life, and keeping the lights on and stuff. So just interacting with people like this has kind of scratched my social itch, and it's been really beneficial, like, to my mental health. And I have a little bit of anxiety and issues like that, so it is nerve-wracking when I first jump on a Zoom with someone who I haven't met before, but I also really like that. It's kind of anxiety slash
Yeah.
excitement.
The
And
thrill of danger.
yeah, I could frame it either way. So, yeah. But
I
your
mean,
question.
two podcasts is quite a lot, though. Like, especially since you're just starting off, I think that's really good going. And to be
Thank you.
fair, even you saying like you just started out at this, you don't come across like you're just starting out. I think it's because you do have that like social nature, but I think like even at our emails, I was thinking like you're quite good at uh, presenting like a welcoming attitude.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, you were just very good. Like even especially for me when I was like waiting to come into the Zoom call, I was like, I haven't worried about this all week, and now suddenly like my stomach has dropped. Because that's just the kind of person I am.
I before every and I've had this is my 9th call, I think. Before every call I feel that way. So and
Yeah, but it's like you go into it and it's like what was I worried about? Especially we didn't even have like that much of an intro before we started recording this, and like you hit record and I was just like, oh, I'm fine now. This is fine.
yeah. Yeah, I get nervous too, but by and large I think it's a testimony to people are in general kind. you know I'm
You
sure
had
that
a you
there's
had a really good streak of like
so
nice
far
people.
I've been lucky. It's what I'm telling myself, is that people are generally kind, especially talking about just creative stuff. You could find commonality, and everybody
Yeah,
just
for
wants to
sure. Yeah.
go about their lives and create.
Yeah, yeah, I think especially people in creative subjects can really resonate with one another because it's such a huge commitment work-wise, and again like expecting yourself to come up with new and fresh things that people will be interested in. I think that really creates like such a solid common ground, no matter if you're like drawing or editing videos or whatever, making films.
Yeah, yeah. I actually find, so in terms of the podcast, it's been kind of relieving. And sometimes it's a longer conversation and then I have to edit and stuff. So there is some work, quote unquote, built into it, or I have to do stuff to make it happen. Which can takes away some of my energy. But I think it's really, up until this point, and hopefully from here on out, energizing. It's gives me a net energy gain as opposed to
Yeah.
net energy drain. And I work on other side projects too, so I wanted to make sure that this was something that was a net energy gain. And my girlfriend kind of encouraged me to do it. I think she realized that I was a social creature and would benefit from these sorts of discussions with strangers. But yeah, so far it's been really beneficial.
That's
For
good.
for yeah, for me, the other projects I work on, and this included like maybe editing this afterwards, there'll be a point where I have a little bit of anxiety because I'm tired and I know I should rest, but at the same time, like I'm a pretty active person, and I always feel a little bit guilty
Oh my God,
for
I'm
relaxing.
exactly the same.
Are you?
I am
It's so
100%.
stupid, and I feel
It's
kind of embarrassed to admit it,
it's
but
it's fucking ridiculous because like the past couple of years I've been working from home. I've been pretty consistently like doing artwork and creating new things and doing like a 9 to 5. And there are days where I'm like, even like a couple of weeks ago where I finished the comic and I put it up on Kickstarter. I should take a week off because I've been working on this for like a whole last year and I can afford to right now. So I took a week off, and like Tuesday, I'm like, right, back to work. it's ridiculous because I feel horrible just sitting around and playing games all day. Because it's like I'm I'm not getting anything done. I could be doing something right now, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I don't
It's
feel as bad
ridiculous.
then.
I've
There's another person
I've
out there.
yeah, I've thankfully convinced myself that I'm okay taking weekends off. Um, but otherwise, I'm just like it's got to be 100%, especially since it's something you're creating, you know. Um,
Like you're fully responsible, you're fully in control. If you want to
yeah,
meet a timeline, it's up to you to meet that timeline,
100%. Because yeah, you're the only person who is like to blame if something isn't made on time, you know. And it's a horrible feeling, but obviously, it kind of ties back to that, like you can't draw every day or whatever because you can't expect yourself to have that level of energy all the time, you know, ebbs and flows. And some days you'll just feel rubbish and you can't do anything about that. And you really need to recognize when you should step back and be like, okay, I'll take an hour off, or I'll take the day off, or I'll have a long lunch, you know, stuff like that. But it's so hard to convince myself sometimes. It just
Yeah,
because it
yeah.
never feels like it, especially if you've been working so hard for so long, or it, you know, if you're working on something new and you're putting your all into developing it, it doesn't feel like you've earned that time off, you know?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back too to what you said earlier about just going for a walk with your partner and having a conversation and coming back and having a aha moment that you
Mm.
really needed to take the break to bring quality back into your work.
Mm.
And yeah, I've been, I don't want to say I've been working really hard at it, but I've been trying to be more conscious of sometimes when I'm forcing myself to do the work, the quality and the level of focus that the work deserves isn't there. So I should
It's,
take a walk and
yeah.
step away and come back when I'm ready to actually give it the focus that it deserves.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, every inch of your body screams at you that's like, I need a break. I need you to stop doing whatever you're doing and do something else because otherwise it's not going to work out. But, like, you're just like, I'm just playing up. Let's keep it going.
But you seem
It's
to have
ridiculous.
yeah, you seem to, at least right now in this conversation, have a good grasp of, I realized I need a break. I realized I needed to go for a walk. Was that something that you realized, before you took on Heaven's Not Enough? Or was it something you arrived at during that project? Or, I look at you now as this sage with all of this wisdom.
That's incredibly boring. Oh, if you knew me
No,
personally, oh my
no.
God.
I mean,
My friends who are going to be watching this are going to be in hysterics.
but I mean,
Well,
when you made the point of recognizing for yourself that when you were trying to create have a drawing every day, but you were going to school and had a lot of other stuff going on, that wasn't really realistic. And for me, that's relieving to hear. Sometimes I need to realize that I'm not being realistic. I'm a pretty unrealistic person, I think, a lot of times, when it comes to the expectations I have for myself and what I could output on a daily basis. So I guess specifically to that part of your sage wisdom,
oh,
um,
it's
when did you arrive at that, and are you able to practice that on a daily basis? Is it something that you need to remind yourself of? And I guess speak to that more
yeah, yeah,
thoroughly.
yeah. Well, when I was in school and like trying to get myself to draw every day, it was definitely um something I didn't grasp. Back. Do you have a tankard for water? Cheers. Oh,
I drink. Cheers. I have coffee there too, but if I drink too much coffee, I'll be really spazzy.
oh, like buzzed, you know.
Yeah, and I have always drank a lot of water, and I was like, I
Mm.
might as well just double down and get the biggest IKEA
Biggest.
mug
Uh,
available.
well, that's good. It's good for you. Um, what were we talking about?
Thanks
Right.
for
When
calling
I
me
was
out.
in, well, so when I was in school, I definitely uh, didn't really recognize that I should be taking more breaks. Because I was like, I've got to improve fast. I'm seeing all these people and all my friends around me who are drawing, and they're incredible. I've got to get there right now. And
Yeah, right.
it's so silly to think about, especially when I was like 16 and 17. I had all the time in the world. Like it's not even 10 years later, and I'm already proud of what I do. And it, especially since I've stopped forcing myself, to cram shit out every day. It's just silly to think about. But especially back then, uh, when I was 16 or so, and like trying to get myself to draw every day, I obviously didn't, because that's silly, and I had school at the same time. But I was also like quite depressed at the time that I didn't realize until a few years later, when I actually got a diagnosis. But taking medication when I was in uni and like going through therapy last year and like for a little while when I was in uni, it's just really been drilled into me that recognizing when you're not well is so important. And just it's just so valuable. You can't function if you're not looking after yourself. You need to learn when you need to look after yourself, which is a strange thing to say because that's such a basic human instinct. But I think when it comes to creative stuff, and you start doing something and you learn like, oh my God, I'm capable of this, and you start drilling every ounce of energy you have into that thing, it kind of goes a little bit haywire. Like you kind of lose sense of that, and you need at some point to take a step back and be like, okay, I know I'm capable of this, but I need to go and have a lie down and like have a snack or something. Yeah, it's something. Yeah, past year, maybe even less than that. Uh, it's something I've started to do. There's still a lot of times when I've been guilty of um, working overtime, and
And I think that's like personally for me, I sometimes overtime is when I'm in like a flow state and I'm really hitting the right notes, so to speak, with what I'm doing. And it's just pouring out of me. And in my case, I've been guilty of feeling like I'm in a flow state and then riding it so hard and for so long that at 4 a.m. I just crash like into a wall, and it takes me 2 weeks to recover because, I was riding it too hard. And instead of finding like a balance where I could have an hour a day, I would try to that one time because I was feeling it pour out 8 hours into it at one time and drive myself into a like burnout situation essentially,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
not sustainable. But yeah, I fully appreciate what you're saying about realizing when you're not well and not forcing yourself to pretend like you can put out your best work when you're kind of forcing it. I think
Yeah,
that's
because
kind of along
yeah, I
the
think
lines of what you're saying.
yeah, because it is exactly that. Like when you start working overtime and you feel like you're in a flow, it's so difficult to detach yourself from that, especially with what you were saying earlier when you feel guilty for not working. If you break yourself out of what you think is a flow, and then you're like, what am I doing? I'm wasting this time. I've got this energy now. I should use it. But yeah, there's just got to be a point where you're like, okay, I wanted to work for an hour today, and I've worked like 2.5 hours. I've got to, that's over twice as much as what I wanted to do. Just to
Yeah.
give yourself a pat on the back and move on, and you can do it again another day, as opposed to like grinding and grinding and grinding until like looking at this project just makes you sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, one thing I was interested to ask you was, at the end of your story, there's the kind of revelation, which is not a spoiler, but kind of a spoiler because I didn't know it until I read the comic that you had this anxiety going into writing and creating the comic. And for me, it was sometimes what I want to create causes me anxiety because the project I have envisioned and in my mind is so large and almost unsurmountable. And maybe sometimes I don't know where to start. Even if I know where to start, the mountain that I have to climb at the foot of the project is so, the mountain is so big before me that I get overwhelmed, and that causes me some anxiety because I feel like I can't do it. And so to read that your anxiety almost was a jumping point, and like you came into this project from your anxiety, and that the project didn't cause you anxiety, or maybe it did. That kind of question in my mind was really interesting. And so I want to ask you about it. How did you go into the project having had anxiety and not have the project cause you anxiety? Thank you for giving me some time to boil all that down for you. I'm a bit of a rambler, but I hope you get the general
That's
sense
fine.
of how
I
my
knew the
mind
payoff would
works.
come off, you know. That's cool. It definitely caused me anxiety. I wrote about it a little bit at the end of the book, where yeah, at first it started as the health anxiety, and then that kind of unravels as like, oh, this project is going somewhere. Oh, what if I don't keep it up, and what if I fail and stop working on it? And then that kind of project like kept going on. I kept writing more and more and developing it and doing the line art and stuff. And I was like, what if nobody likes this? So it, it's definitely the case where like if it is a creative project that is coming directly from you, I think it's bound to cause you anxiety. I think unless unless you are like incredibly like self-centered, like, oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I think there's always going to be some part of you that's like you're going to worry. You're going to worry about one thing or another, and I think that's a really important thing to talk about, and I think that's why I mentioned it at the end, is because like everyone's going to have their struggles with what they're writing, and making it and finalizing it is proof to yourself mostly, not just other people, that you've overcome this and you're much better for it. Whether like people don't like your story or not, you've made a story, you know?
Right. Yeah. And through the course of the creative process, you talked about self-doubt, like, I can't do this. And that's the one I guess I was referring to earlier with the mountain. I can't do this because this is too big.
Mm.
And then another form of self-doubt, which is really like fear of criticism, that even if I create this mountain and I climb to the top of it, and start jumping and cheering because, yeah, I did it. I overcame my feeling of inadequacy that I couldn't bring this project to fruition. People are going to look at you on top of the mountain and say, oh, that's stupid. You're stupid. And then your mountain comes crumbling down below you. So those are two things that you touched on, and two concepts that cause people anxiety when they have a creative project in front of them. How did you overcome those kind of negative thoughts?
Well, starting and because heaven's not enough like was a mountain. It was so much bigger than me and so much bigger than anything I'd ever done. And I'm so fortunate to just have so many visuals and plot points come to me literally overnight. To the point where it feels like I look at the book and I'm like, I didn't make this because it just came to me in a dream, which is a weird feeling to have. But starting out, I was lucky enough to like see this mountain and think, okay, well, I know how it starts. I can start chipping away at that and just see where it goes. And like, I know this part, I can get that down and then worry about this part later. So for me, it was quite easy to separate what I could and couldn't do and what I needed to chip away at that mountain. So it's just starting with what you know. It's like it's like the bare basics. Like the most basic piece of advice is just go with what you know, but it really is what you need to do. But the fear of criticism was, I definitely had that a lot. I was definitely worried about little things like the dialogue, like I mentioned earlier. I was like, this doesn't seem like a person would say this. This doesn't seem like it flows normally. But the main way I overcame that was just having proofreaders, was just having friends who were like, yeah, I'll take like an hour or so out to read this and say what I think. And it was so like it's such an easy thing to do, but it was so rewarding. Which I didn't want to do that at first because when I had the dream, I had a friend who was at the convention with me, who was staying at my place overnight. And when I woke up, I was like, I just had the craziest dream I've got to tell you about. So like her and my partner were the only people who knew about the story for like a good while. Because I was like, I feel like this is really great, and I want to keep it under wraps. And then as I wrote it more and more and more, and I got so used to the story, I was like, I'm bored of this already. This doesn't seem like it's a good story anymore. I need to get someone else to look at it. Because it's like that with painting a picture too. You look at it for so long, you put like 5 hours into it, and you're like, this doesn't even look like a painting anymore. I don't even know what I'm doing. So it was so valuable to get other people to look at it. And I was very worried of criticism, but I knew the kind of things that I was worried about and what I wanted people to look out for, which was like little things like spelling errors to like, oh, is this scene right? Like, is there any emotional impact to this? And I leaned into it as opposed to just saying, read this and tell me it's great. I was like, read it and say if anything doesn't make sense or if anything's just plain shit. And that was the best thing that I did for it. Because especially
was that a first for you to open yourself up to criticism of your peers and ask for feedback?
No, I don't think at all. I think it was just a very different situation with the comic. I think I'm so used to especially with my friend Kel, I'm so used to just sending him artwork throughout the day and being like, look at this terrible hand that I drew, and be like, oh, what can I do to fix this? Or like, which one of these do you like better? I do that quite a lot in the Discord that we have for our Patreon. Not to advertise. If you want to join the Kip and Kel Discord, but we have like an art channel.
Please,
in there.
By all means, yeah.
Oh, maybe later. We have like a bunch of different channels in there. One of them is art channel, and quite a lot will go in there and be like, "Oh, which one of these sketches do you like better?" Because it's so hard to be able to tell yourself, and an outside perspective it's really what you need sometimes, especially in creative subjects. It's just it's just so valuable.
Yeah. I think it's hard to create something for other people in a bubble.
Oh, for sure.
That feedback is really important, but you have to be receptive to it, and you also have to know if you want general feedback or, like you're saying, tell me, I know this hand's kind of rubbish. Tell me what you think about it. How can I improve it? Do I just throw this hand out, or do I redraw it in a different way?
Yeah.
Sorry, you froze for a little bit, and I was worried as I was talking. But you're back.
Back.
It tells me that my internet connection is unstable, but it should be fine from here on out. Yeah, interesting. And then you mentioned like painting and stuff. What I don't know if you're done. Do you want to elaborate any more on the receiving feedback and criticism and?
I don't know. I think it's just quite often now, especially since I've started putting a lot more time into my artwork, past few years or so, and putting a lot more detail in, there really does come a point where you've just been staring at something for so long that it doesn't look real anymore. And there's more often than not, I suppose this kind of links back to like not pushing yourself or anything, and not like grinding until something's
I think
done.
so, yeah.
I think something that's helped me step back from my work and take a break is that if you work on one piece for too long, like 3 or 4 hours at once, you're going to look at it and be like, I can't tell what's different about this from when I started. It doesn't look like anything's it changed. So you really need to just, close it down and work on something else.
Yeah, and I think something that everybody could relate to illustrate that point is when you were in school, whether it's high school or university, and you were writing a paper, whether it was a long paper or a short paper, but you invested some time in it, and you were editing it. You had a first draft, then you went through and edited it, and then you went through again. Sometimes I stumble over my own tongue. You comb through it again, and then you comb through it again. And every time you comb through it, you find something that feels strange or not right. And you're changing it every time, to the point where words that you use on a daily basis, you start to question. I think that's the point. You need to eject yourself from the sea and take a break and read it again the next day or 2 days later.
Oh yeah. I was definitely like that in school with writing papers for my English class and stuff. But I was not a model student, and I would just submit them anyway. Yeah, definitely better with more of the visual creative stuff than like writing.
But you did them. That's what's important.
I did
You
them.
submitted it. Submitted it.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't. Everyone, listen. It doesn't matter if you pass or fail. Just submit it. Don't take that. That's terrible advice.
No, but to your point about like working with what you have and working with what you have to do what you can do, I think is something that kind of summarizes what you said before, which is basically, to do this really ambitious comic, I just did it. Like I worked with what I had. I knew some of what I needed to start creating to start the project, and I started with it. And then I accumulated thumbs, and then I took those thumbs and I digitized them, and but you can't start without taking a first step.
Exactly. Yeah. It really was just working with what I knew. I was like, I don't know how to write a comic, but I know how to draw. So I'm just gonna do a lot of drawing of all these different pages and panels and what I envisioned for the comic, and then take it into digital and draw some more. It was that was a big part of just chipping away at that mountain. And then as it started to get more and more formed, then I started to worry about the things I didn't know, like making the plot work or the dialogue or all that, making the story actually flow.
Yeah, and it's like the sculpture analogy is good too. Like you create the base shape. So you had all the thumbs maybe, and then you added finer detail, and you kept massaging the clay until you had it to the level of detail that you were, after from the get-go, your goal. And I think that's awesome. Speaking of clay, you mentioned other mediums like painting and stuff. So I'm curious to hear about non-digital, non-comic related art and what other things you do in creative spaces and creative mediums.
Well, yeah, painting, I picked up watercolors maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And from there, I went into gouache, which is like quite more similar to watercolors than say like acrylics or whatever. So I do that every now and again. It's not really my main medium. It's something like if I want to branch out and try something different for a bit, I'll be like, oh, I'll bust out the paints. That's quite a because you have to like wait for the paint to dry and stuff when you're painting, so that one takes like quite a while. So it's not something I do quite regularly because I'm a little bit impatient. But it's quite satisfying and relaxing to do. But yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I do a bit of sewing, like I'll hand make plushes and stuff like that. I made a coat last year, which I didn't know how to do before, so I was just like, I want to make a coat. I saw like it was when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out, and there's this coat the female characters can get. It's just like a really cute, fluffy coat. I was like, I really want that coat, so I just made it. Something just overtook me. That's really how it is whenever I try to learn anything new. Like something just overtakes me, and I'm like, I'll be obsessed with it for like a few weeks, and then it's poof, you know?
I think we're pretty similar in that regard. Yeah. I've made very random things.
You know, I always have I always feel about it like if I have this passion now, I should act on it because I think that'll be valuable experience. And if it doesn't go anywhere, then it doesn't go anywhere. At least I tried. And if it does go somewhere, then oh dear, I've made a comic. You know. But other creative stuff. Well, I did 3D in uni, like game art, which was all things from like 2D concept art to like actually 3D making levels and stuff like that. But I also do a little bit of video editing. Not a lot, not as much anymore. But I have, I know some of the ways.
And would either of those be areas that you would or are already considering exploring more? Especially, I'm interested to hear more about 3D, design, and if that's something that you're still interested in. I've explored it myself a couple of years back when I was designing a helmet prop, like wearable helmet for a movie I was working on, and I created a rough draft, and I was getting familiar with Blender and 3D image generation in general, and then I was just like, there's no way I could keep up with this. It's pretty technical, and creating in 2D environments is good enough for me. So yeah, are you still interested in that, and what caused your interest? And yeah, tell me more about 3D stuff.
Yeah, well, when I was 17, 18 or so and about to go into uni, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew it was going to be something arty. Like there were a good lot of illustration courses in the UK, but then there were like two places in the UK that did game art, and I was like, that's really really cool. I basically based my A-level graphic design project off of video game. I did that with like it's so embarrassing to think about now because the art was really bad. But I did that with like two of my art projects in sixth form. I based it off of video games because the first one was based off of TF2 and the second one was based off of Don't Starve. And it was most of it was just like exploring character design and stuff like that and the environments. So video games were always like a huge influence for me, and I was like, working in games industry doesn't seem like a bad shout. But I've said this to so many people now. If going to uni, especially art school, is good for one thing, it's figuring out what you don't want to do. So I really, really like 3D. But games industry is just kind of, to me at the moment, which is so bizarre because my friend Kel, I keep bringing up Kel, but he's such a big part of my life. But my friend Kel is in uni at the moment for animation, and he keeps coming to me like, I don't like animation. I'm like, it'd be that way. I think that is a part of like doing it every day, I suppose, and especially doing it but not doing the things you want to do with it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so like a lot of our 3D was exploring making characters and stuff like that, and concept art, and like iterations, just like and a lot of stuff you commonly see in like game art jobs, and of course learning how to do 3D. And I didn't really, I enjoyed it, but of course, it's school, so like your passion for it just kind of withers a little bit, especially if you're doing it for a few years. And then in my third year, they were like, okay, it's like your last project, do whatever you want. And suddenly the flames of passion, poof, you know. So what I did, my final major project was stylized environments. Um, what I did was I basically made 3D comic panels. So like if you were looking at them head on, they were completely 2D, but you could like move them around and look around in the space, and like all the assets and environments and stuff would be 3D. And that was so therapeutic after years of trying to do realistic characters and stuff like that, and having it not click, and then doing the complete opposite with stylized environments, and then being like, this is absolutely incredible. I love this. Um, so that was strange, but I did do that like day in day out because it was uni. So after I graduated, I wasn't super into 3D anymore, and I only really picked it up again quite recently, which is embarrassing because I graduated quite a while ago, and it is my whole last degree. Um, but I did pick it up again recently because, yeah, I was learning how to use Blender because I was using 3ds Max when I was in school. So I was learning how to do Blender, and I was like, this is so much more fun than I remembered. It's definitely a very long process, but it is incredibly rewarding, and definitely to see something in a 3D space take shape like that it's so interesting. It's such an interesting skill to know, and I'm very grateful that I did do it. Um, but I think I do still really enjoy like making environments and stuff like that. But I think
Yeah.
I think if I did go for like a games industry job, I'd probably do like concept art or something because that's, it's 2D. It's what I already know. It's what I've known for so long now.
Yeah. I picked up on, or I should say, I enjoyed your environments in the comic as well. So, did is there any influence from that senior thesis project or that final project of your career at uni as a 3D game designer?
Uh,
Did that influence anyway the way that you approached the environments in the comic?
for sure, yeah. Because that was,
Because they're not flat, I should say. I guess I felt depth in
oh yeah, yeah.
not in every panel. A lot of panels, I think I felt that you made the creative choice to make the background pretty plain so that
Mm.
we could focus on some of the characters and their emotions. Um, but some of the rooms that the characters are placed in, there's perspective there and depth. So
Mm.
yeah, I
Yeah.
wondered now hearing that if your career as a 3D artist
Mm.
influenced the comic at all.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because it is literally like shifting focus between what's going on in the panel, and instead of like, um, yeah, it's like shifting between just establishing shots and then like actually going into like, oh, here's what the characters are saying. Um, so yeah, it is exactly that. And I think, yeah, my final major project had such a huge impact on me artistically because before that I loathed loathed drawing environments. It was something I just never did. I was always 100% character centric. I was one of those artists who was like, oh, you won't catch me drawing a background, which is very funny to think about now. But that it was the first time I had done an environment and actually felt confident about it. So that was a huge step for me.
In the comic or in with your senior
With my uni work.
yeah, yeah. And then in the work that you did before between uni and the comic, were you drawing backgrounds at all? I
Yeah, yeah.
really enjoyed the backgrounds in the comic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I really started to branch out with it. I did like a lot more paintings with, especially natural environments. I did a lot of stuff with like big forests and uh, quite detailed foliage and stuff like that. And yeah, it just really clicked with me after uni, and it was so rewarding to make like these little pleasing little forests. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, that's it for the questions I have written down, but I'm also curious on a more personal note, what anime you're a Naruto fan. What anime excites you now? Are
I
you
like to
watching
think,
much?
I like to think that this whole time you're asking questions and I was talking about the comic and you're like, yeah, yeah, okay, but like, what anime do you like?
No, no, I wrote it
No.
down as an ending question to explore more personal matters.
So
I think I've
let's get to the
already
meat of it.
I think I've already illustrated how impressed I was with your comic, and
Thank
I
you.
have written down here um, one thing that I wanted to mention that is not true of all comics I read, not true of all animations I watch, is that I think it has tremendous reread value. Um, yeah, I'm a person and I have an older brother who I'm really close with, and we revisit stuff from our childhood like pretty frequently. We ask each other, when's the last time you watched Akira, for example? We love
Mm.
Akira. When's the last time you watched Akira? When's the last time you reread the manga? And there may be years in between, but inevitably we're going to re-engage it because it's a story that we love, and that was influential on us. And I think that your comic similarly has reread value. Um, so to
That's very
illustrate that I'm not
flattering.
just wondering what anime you're watching,
I know, I'm just pulling your leg.
I, I know. Um, Back to the comic. I'll tie this into the story a little bit. Let me get creative here. I was watching it. I read your comic. I don't remember the order of operations here. I think I read your comic and then I was watching some anime that evening. And there was a point in the anime that it was atmospheric and a crow chirped, as they do in the anime, in establishing shots. And one thing that I love, I kind of shared with you that I really love Japanese movies, and I go to this Japanese film festival every year. Um, and I watch a hell of a lot more Japanese movies than I do American movies. And I always wondered why I gravitated towards Japanese cinema. And I think one of the reasons is because of their willingness to explore silence and um, not action-based plot drivers. Something big doesn't need to happen. It's more relationship-based plot drivers. And I think your comic does both. And I would say that's true of Japanese movies and anime. And so I was watching anime and I heard the bird chirp and I remembered your comic, and I thought there were a lot of points of silence in your comic that a bird chirped, and it had a lot more meaning than if you had some action there or some dialogue. And so I think that's why I personally was struck by your comic, because I appreciate stories that are relationship driven and kind of explore the silence in between dialogue and action.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Wow,
what's your
that's
favorite anime?
anyway. Um,
No,
no,
go on with
that
what you were going
that's
to say.
that's very flattering. I really do appreciate all the thought you've like put into
I
what
didn't
you
need
think of
to
the comic.
yeah, I didn't need to put much thought into it. Like I read it once and I was like, wow, this is how I feel. And then I heard a crow chirp in an anime and I was like, oh, she did, or they explored that,
Mm.
and they achieved this thing that I appreciate so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because before this, when I sent you the copy for the comic, I was thinking like, what if I get on? And he's just like, oh, it wasn't really my cup of tea. So I'm very glad you appreciated it because I feel like it's definitely the kind of thing that's not for everyone, and that's fine. That's the case with all media,
Right.
you know. Um, but it's just so emotionally driven that I think it could be very hit or miss for a lot of people. I'm not doing a good job of promoting it, am I? um,
I could
so
be your
that
hype man. I could be your hype man.
yeah.
Stand at your table at the convention. This is my jam.
Yo, you read this shit? Um, no, yeah, but that's good to hear, and it was the case for like when I was sending it to a few friends of mine to like proofread it, and they were all like, "Oh, this is wow, this is great. I love how you did this and that and this." So I was thinking like I'm going on a very lucky streak with like all these different people like in my comic. The next one who reads it, that's going to be the one who's like, oh, yeah, I didn't think much, you know. So I'm very glad to. Now, my favorite anime. Been beating around the bush for too long with this one. At the moment, it's Land of the Lustrous, which have you seen it already?
No, no.
Oh my god! So there's only one season of the anime out at the moment because the manga's ongoing. The manga's got like 10 volumes at the moment, and there was an 11th that was supposed to come out last August, but then it got delayed. So basically, the world that as we know it has been like pretty much like struck by a bunch of comets and destroyed, to the point where like human life kind of retreated to the ocean and then separated into three different species. One of them is like a sea creature. One of them is like these people made out of gemstones, which is like uh, who we follow throughout the story, and the other are like these people who live on the moon. Um, and basically, there's only like 20 or so of these gem people, and these people from the moon keep coming down and attacking them and like taking the gemstones away. And it's like you follow this character, Phosphospholite. 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 They call them Phos. Um, and they're like pretty much useless. Like all the other gems have jobs and stuff like that. That like whether it's fighting or there's like a doctor, there's someone who works in the library, but Phos is like pretty much useless at whatever they do. And if finding like their master is like, oh, I have a job for you. Make like an encyclopedia of all the stuff on the island. So they're going about, and it's kind of like I won't like go through the whole plot because I will be talking for hours. I love it so much.
You're better
But
at promoting this than you're.
go watch Land of the Lost Earth. It's great. But it's kind of exploring. It goes into exploring like the different gems and like why these people on the moon are coming down and like taking them, and fostering like trying to communicate with these people. And it's really really interesting, and the anime is so beautiful because it's all 3D. It's by the studio who did Beastars, um and the hair of the gems is like glistening and like actually made of gemstone, and it's just so beautiful to watch. And my god, does the manga go places that I didn't expect it to go? Because if you watch the first season, you kind of get an inkling of like, oh, this might be the case.
The direction that it's
Yeah,
going.
yeah. Like this might be what's behind this mystery. And then I read like the next issue of the manga, and I was like, this opens up a lot more questions. But okay, but it's all like in like a very good way. It is all just outstanding work. It's what I aspire to be at, to be honest.
And I guess that begs the question, like, what do you see for your own future if that's what you aspire to be? Where do you go from here after
Uh,
this current Kickstarter closed and you fulfill on it?
I'll take like a little break and just do some of my normal illustrations and what I'm used to. But I want to make more comics. I kind of have an idea for one at the moment that uh, needs a lot more fleshing out. But I have a concept that I'm quite happy with, which when I was writing it and like coming to the tail end of Heaven's Not Enough, I was thinking like, oh, I want to do this again, but I don't really have anything, and it's hard to just pluck something out of thin air and develop on it.
I had a
But
dream last night. Maybe I could
oh
share
no.
with you. Let's see if you could spin this into something good. I was in like New Orleans, and my car wouldn't start, and it was kind of like dusky. So I'm setting the stage. I got out of my car, and there were like picnic tables, and Shaquille O'Neal was there. I shit you not.
Might have a problem with like licensing and stuff. I might have to look into that one.
And I talked with
The
Shaq.
Shaquille O'Neal trademark, like.
I'm not making this up. I actually had this dream, and I felt compelled to tell you. Knowing that Heaven's Not Enough was dream inspired, I woke up this morning and was like, okay.
It's funny because I have a bunch of wacky dreams like that, and every time I have like some weirdo bizarre dream, I always think like I was thinking about making Heaven's Not Enough, and I'm like, wow, this is really like two ends of the same thing. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
What did you say to Shaq?
I fell off for a second. We were too excited about
I was going to say, was that a touchy subject?
I can't share. I can't reveal what I told. No, I think
it's too much.
I think
he said something to me.
It was, yeah. I think I was anticipating our call this morning. So I was talking with him, but I was considering, he's famous. People ask him to be on their podcast all the time. Those are the thoughts that were going through my head.
Oh, that's so funny.
I don't want to be an annoying fanboy. I'm not even really a fan, so I can't be a fanboy. So then it's even more annoying if I ask him to be on my podcast.
I was gonna say that's so funny that you were having dreams and like work was like weaving its way into your dream. But I had the exact same thing earlier this week. But before I think about that, I think about this a lot. Do you think last night Shaq had a dream about meeting you in like a dusty park, in like a dusky old dark park?
I could only hope so. He's
thinking like, I kind of want to go on a podcast sometime soon.
Shaq, holler at me. What's your random?
Shaq, if you're out there.
I do wonder about
God, what would you do if you found out Shaq
too.
watched this?
I would think that's pretty cool. And he's involved. I saw him on Justin Bieber's, I think he was there. Was he there? Or maybe it was part of my dream. I think he was at the roast for Justin Bieber. I don't know why I engaged with that material on Facebook, but I did. Maybe that's why he was in my dream, now that I think about it.
Just got Shaq on the mind.
Yeah. But he had like a video game, I think, on Sega Genesis back in the day. He's a branded man, and he has had a lot of content generated off of him. So I would explore the creativity of managing his personal brand and what role he played in the development of any of that media. So Shaq, there you go. I laid the groundwork for why you would be on my podcast.
I love that you've thought about this.
I didn't. That was all riffing.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Don't worry. I got you.
I wasn't deliberating on it all morning before our call after my dream last night. So
I got to write down my
Shaq really does
my
hit
Shaq
me
talking points. That's so funny. I have dreams like that all the time. I'm obviously a very vivid dreamer. I have like a dream diary that I write every now and again. If I have like a banger, I'll write it down with the date. But most of it is just like garbage. I'm so amazed I came up with something that is even like
I love that you call your dreams garbage, as if you could control them. Trust me, everybody has garbage dreams.
I wake up like I just saw a shitty movie, I was like, what the hell was that? Oh no, but it's funny that you had kind of like a work-related dream, because I was kind of having those earlier this week about this podcast.
Really?
And I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit it, because all I had known about you was like the 2 or 3 messages we had sent on Instagram, a couple of emails, and like I had watched one of your podcasts that came out just like at the vibe. So, so like I was kind of I was a little bit stressed earlier this week because all I was doing was Kickstarter preparation. I was making like behind my laptop right now is so many envelopes, just so many envelopes. I was doing so much packaging this week, and I was kind of stressed out about it. Like, I've shipped a lot of stuff internationally before, but what if something goes missing? What if something just doesn't turn up or turns up damaged? It's obviously all stuff that can be replaced later down the line, but it just worries me now because it's my first print run. So like I was having a lot of stress dreams throughout the week, and like during the day when I was stressed to relax, I would play Pokemon. I just got the DLC, and I was doing like Dynamax raids. This is so embarrassing to talk about, but obviously the things that were on my mind were Dynamax raids in Pokemon and going on this podcast. So I had a dream I was doing one with you.
What was I like?
I don't know if you played. I don't know. I remember you were really. I don't think I was doing very well, and you were kind of like, well.
Did I have an English accent?
No, I don't think you spoke a lot. I think your disappointment just came through through body language.
I was just kind of.
Yeah, you just. Well, I don't know if that's weird to say to someone you just met. Like, oh, I had a dream about you the other night. Rest assured, I'm an extremely vivid dreamer. This stuff happens all the time.
Has that always been the case, or because I know in my experience with dreams, sometimes I'll have, as you call it, a banger of a dream, not a rubbish garbage dream like a lot of them. And I'll be like, oh, that was a good dream. And dreaming is fun. And I want to remember more of my dreams because I'm sure I'm having them, but just not waking up and recollecting any of them. So, sometimes I'll take note of my dreams and then I start remembering more of my dreams. Inevitably, I don't continue the practice. But so that being said, for you, were you always a vivid dreamer? There's some practice that you use to encourage your dreams? And yeah, tell me about your dreams.
Tell me about your dreams. Yeah, like as long as I remember, I'd always had crazy dreams. I just thought it was normal. But then, like, I met people who were like, "Oh, I don't dream." I'm like, "What do you mean you don't dream? Like, what happens when you go to sleep? What do you see?" But no, my dad has always been like a really vivid dreamer as well, so that's probably where I get it from. He's also been like quite a vivid, an active like sleepwalker and sleep talker, which I do get a little bit sometimes, which is quite funny. His claim to fame in that area was once he made spaghetti in his sleep, which I don't know how true that is. It's quite impressive if it is. Yeah, I do a bit of sleepwalking and talking on the side as well. It's a side
Your
job.
Side hustle.
Yeah. Yeah, don't make comic about those ones. Oh my God, you know what? Sometimes, quite recently, actually, I've been waking up and hallucinating, which
after you wake up.
It's like I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm still like kind of dreaming,
okay.
And I'll like see things in the room. It's never anything scary like sleep paralysis or anything like that. Moving back to anime, about a year ago, I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw Kakashi, Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke like in the doorway of my bedroom, and they saw me looking at them and they closed the door. I was like, "Come back."
So for a moment you were thinking, now's my moment, I get to join.
Yeah, I was like, holy shit, I could be the new member of Team 7. Like one of my more recent ones was I woke up and I looked across the room into the little ensuite bathroom, and I saw alligators, but they were like little cartoon colorful alligators. They were like that big. And they were a multitude of colors and they were really cute and just kind of like, they were like really chubby as well. And they were just like plodding around. I was like, oh my God, this gators in my bathroom. I've got to tell Cal. And I got up and I grabbed my phone and I opened Twitter and I looked up and they were gone. And I was like, I was going to take a picture.
Did you remember them enough to draw them at least?
Yes, I actually made a comic about it, about
Oh,
like that incident. Um, so, oh my god, I remember it all in my dreams now. Because if I have decent ones, I write them down in my little dream journal. But if I have like really really good ones, I'm talking top tier bangers. I'll make comics out of them. Um, so on my Twitter, like every now and again, I'll be like, here's something else that's like crawled out of my brain last night. The last one I did a comic of was I was just knocking about, walking about, and there was a turtle on the ground, and I was like, I can't tell if this is a saltwater or a freshwater turtle. So I don't know why that was on my mind, but I took a picture of it and I sent it in our Discord, and I was like, "Hey guys, is this a saltwater or a freshwater turtle?" And they were like, check the teeth, obviously. And I was like, check the teeth, obviously. And I look at its mouth, and it's got these horrible, long, pointy fangs. And I was like, saltwater. And I woke up, and I was like, what does this mean?
it's funny because as you were telling this story, I wasn't sure if that was the dream yet. Because it was all like somewhat plausible until the teeth. So
It is. Yeah, a lot of my dreams are like that. Yeah. A lot of my dreams are like that. They're like, a lot of the situations are like kind of normal, but there's just like one little thing that's very, very off. Oh, it's so good. It makes for such good comic content, you know?
Yeah. How many short comics have you done?
It is not many. I really ought to do more. Because I do have quite a lot of good ones. Um, God, off the top of my head, I don't know. I've got like a folder on my computer full of like all the old dream content, the funny dream content that I've done, and I want to make like a little book out of that someday when I get enough. Um, but I did like look back and search on my Twitter for anything with the phrase in it. I had a dream, and there's a lot. There's a lot of weird shit in there. So I'd love to make like maybe that'll be my next comic. Like I'll have like the very upsetting dream content, Heaven's Not Enough, and then like the lighthearted comical dream diary collection.
And there is balance to the universe, ladies and gentlemen. So it is your future project that you're like noodling on now. Did that come from a dream as well, or?
No, I was it was just like a very small idea I had. I won't talk too much into it because most of the stuff I have right now isn't like major plot points and nothing light or anything. So the main idea of it is it's very Groundhog Day. There's a guy, and after a very long and hard day, he's so frustrated because everything just went wrong, like as badly as it could in this one day, and then he gets so frustrated and something happens, and he time travels back, but only like to the start of that day. And it's about him trying to like correct all these situations, but there is a twist that I won't mention that kind of wriggles its way into it and really changes the situation for him. That
Really
just
fun.
kind of that just kind of started with the time travel idea because this is also a dream thing. I'm always having dreams where like I go back to high school, but I have like all of my knowledge from today, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna fucking ace all of my classes. But I know that wouldn't really be the case because I would inevitably start going to school and get really, really bored. But it's just little ideas like that. Like I have like a couple of bits and pieces written down from stuff like that, but nothing that's really developed now. And this time travel thing is the only thing that's like since been developed in my head. So I'm quite excited to like look into that a little more. Oh, damn it. I guess that is kind of from a dream. Shoot.
So you had a time traveling dream.
Sort of, yeah.
Was it a daydream or a night dream? You're just sitting there all day.
It's funny because it did start as like a night dream, and then like every now and again I'll think about like, oh, if I went back to uni right now with all my knowledge, oh, I'd do this and I wouldn't do that. But like, I don't know. It's funny when you see it play out as a dream, but when you think about that stuff in real life, it's like, no, that would be a horrible situation. You know, you'd be years and years out from the things and the people that you love, and you've just got to enjoy. Like, sure, you might be really smart, you might be like a smart ass and like ace all of your classes, but
And bet on all the right stocks and be super rich.
yeah, you'd be super rich, but like you'd be really bored just waiting for things to happen, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, my favorite song doesn't even exist as a thought yet, you know?
Well, then you can make it.
Oh,
Ooh.
I've wanted to, you know what? I have thought about stuff like that, but I thought, what if you had a favorite song and you went back and you made that song, but the original artist had never heard of you or that song, and then they make that song.
And then there's a conflict.
Yeah,
Or,
and then
or
there's
the more, I think the more troubling thing is that you could make the same exact song as that artist, almost even replicating their voice, but then it doesn't become popular.
oh, that'd be
And then
terrible.
you
Oh, but
and then
then
you
that other
ruin it.
person would be called out.
Yeah, and then you ruin it. You ruin the joy of that song having become popular and distributed to the masses.
You know what?
It's an interesting thought experiment.
I'm just so glad I'm not the only one who thinks of shit like this.
Oh no, definitely not.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Actually, if you go, the first episode of this podcast was with a buddy of mine from college. And we talked about this idea of like, oh, if you went back, we had a moment in college when we first started and we kind of first met each other. And we both remember it where we were sitting at the campus center area one evening and talking about life and the girls that we were interested in, stuff like that. And you know, we're older dudes now, and we talked about if you could go back to that time, knowing what you know now, and tell yourself anything, would you impart wisdom, or would you allow yourself to go through the trials and tribulations and experiences? They're not all trials and tribulations of the, you know, years in between. And
Mm.
yeah, anyway, it is interesting to think about
Yeah,
going back
yeah,
and meeting yourself.
that's a really difficult question though, because I've thought about that, particularly especially when I was younger and really depressed, and when I was in uni. God, not to bring the mood down.
No,
When I
not
was
at
in
all.
uni,
Yeah.
I got into quite like I got into a relationship with someone who was very emotionally abusive, and that really took a toll on me, especially in my um, third year. And it, you know, it was like the main reason I went into therapy, you know, because I very desperately needed, you know, ways to cope and ways to unpack all this trauma that happened to me. And I don't think if I could go back, I would change a thing, because I am who I am today, and I'm talking to you about something I've created that I'm very proud of. And who knows if that would exist if I had changed even the slightest thing.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I think what matters is that um, I'm happy now and I'm doing what I love.
That's really beautiful. And yeah, I think there's I'm serious. Actually, uh, yeah, no, I think that is really beautiful because I have kind of myself at times had regrets, or um, I'm looking for a word and I can't find it, but just basically being stuck in my own head about, you know, things that impacted my emotional state with the in the present. And yeah, just being stuck on those past events is not very helpful. But if you could overcome those past events, and they can lead to beauty in the present,
Yeah.
as
Yeah, I
which is
think
why I referred to, you know, what you said is beautiful, because you take something that is negative but you turn it into kind of a positive, and you can't go back, so it's really not worth exploring even though we're going through this hypothetical
Even
and
though
it is
we're
interesting.
100% exploring it.
We're 100% exploring it. But at the end of the day, I think the answer that I found and you found is that it's maybe worth exploring, and it's interesting in some ways, but at the end of the day, you can't change it, and your current state, and if it's a happy state, that's beautiful,
Yeah.
is the result of having had that experience.
Yeah, yeah, it's not worth getting hung up on. I always felt like I've had a very hard time learning to forgive myself for silly mistakes I've made in the past, and to the point where I started meditating for that. If I ever get into a state where I'm like, I'm thinking about this thing that I did forever ago that I wish I didn't do, I just stop. Just I downloaded Headspace just so that I could like have something make me take a break and meditate and get rid of that. But I still feel like this every now and again, where I'll regret something, but I always feel like regret and guilt now is just proof that you've like changed as a person and that you're a better person now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's quite hard to come to terms with because you're still like, oh, I still made this stupid mistake. But I don't know, you just got to learn to forgive yourself sometimes, especially if, you're not hurting anyone now and like everything's okay now. You just kind of got to learn to move on.
Yeah. And also, I had a podcast with my last podcast that's not yet released. We kind of talked about the idea of you could have a thought and not necessarily prescribe to that thought. Like an idea could be exploring something, but at the end of the day, you don't have to agree with it. And I think that's, true of kind of what you just said about you can have the idea of feeling guilty and negative about yourself for having done or had something done to you in the past. But it doesn't mean that you have to prescribe to feeling guilty. You
Yeah.
could have the thought about being guilty or blaming yourself, but it doesn't mean you have to follow through with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, everyone makes mistakes and it's just harder to deal with when it's yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, your favorite anime?
Ooh. No, I'm put on the spot. Favorite historically or currently?
I did current. Well, I suppose mine is both. I do currently. We'll do currently.
Yeah, I started watching Tower of God recently.
I haven't heard of that one.
It's a Crunchyroll webtoon production, or at least they brought it over to the US. And it's drawn. The animation is really unique and beautiful, and yeah, I get really turned off by things that seem like they're just churned out. And I like old school, like 80s anime too, even 70s anime. And now 90s anime is pretty old too. So I guess I'm a fan of nostalgic stuff, but I do try to keep up with some contemporary anime. And I mentioned like Devilman Crybaby, which is already like I don't know, 4 years old or so, but
Is it already 4 years old? Because
I'm
it's one
just
of those ones where
guessing.
I'm like, it's one of those ones where I'm like, oh, everyone says that's really good. I should watch it.
Oh,
And
you
then
haven't watched it?
no, no.
Yeah, I highly
Time
recommend
just
it.
keeps going on. Huh?
Yeah, and then you have that much more to catch up on.
Yeah.
I'm watching Gundam Iron Blooded Orphans now.
That sounds tight as hell.
It's I'm I'm a fan of the old Gundams, so I'm watching it with a critical eye, I would say. But there's a lot of people out there who enjoy that one. I think I'm kind of like you. I'm like a closet critic. I
Well, I'm not
maybe have.
closet anymore. Now everyone knows.
Well, you didn't pursue that career path,
No, yeah,
as
that's
but
true.
you had thought about it. You had considered it. Yeah, that's all that's on my slate right now. I think I plan to watch some. I also recently watched some Initial D, which is interesting because it's pretty. I think it's 90s, and it's an anime about street racing in Japan with older cars on like windy mountainous roads, and using and driving technique and stuff like that. But they use some really archaic 3D animation interspersed to, animate the cars, and it's really bad. It's really bad. It's terrible. But, the industry of 3D animation had to start somewhere. And I think that's probably where it started, because it's really pretty poorly
we
done.
came we came full circle, because that's the start of 3D animation, and Land of the Lustrous is where it's at now. I think they did a pretty good job.
I'm curious to see that, because I'm a skeptic about 3D animation, in that I think that production companies are going to use already established material more easily, and it'll be like, things will seem less original.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I get that.
in overly produced anime, I think that's the case already, even if it's just 2D, that like,
Yeah,
they churn it out really fast because they have some assets at their disposal. And if you
yeah,
have
for sure.
if you have the mapping of the puppet in 3D, you could just paint over it really quickly and you have the movement figured out. So like,
That's kind of it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I can get it from the perspective of it would probably do wonders for stopping things like crunch times and like
right.
hitting deadlines and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're just like, oh, it's like how there's a new FIFA game every year and none of them are really that different.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. That's
but
a good analogy.
but I feel like Land of the Lustrous, to me at least, really stands out because it's such a unique story and has such a very vivid and unique look to it that it feels like nothing else. And there's a lot of very cool visuals and like high-paced action scenes and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah, I painted my pessimistic view, which was my view for a couple of years, but recently I've become more optimistic, I guess. And I've seen it as I think it's true of anything. Like, technology is going to always evolve, and it's what you do with the technology. So having these assets at their disposal where they don't need to recreate it all the time, they could put more time into levels and areas of production that we don't even yet imagine. And I think that things will become, audiences are always going to want originality, and not everything is going to be original. And that, I think, was always the case. In the early days of animation, people would copy over animation cells and recreate the movement and stuff like that across different animes, and find cost savings in that way. But ultimately, like, there's still really awesome animation that pushes the boundaries of what we thought possible. And I guess that's where I'm at now, is I'm a little bit pessimistic about it, but at the same time I realize it just might afford new opportunities for
Yeah,
creativity.
yeah. It's like cutting corners to keep up with demands of what audience wants, and like especially like how quickly people will consume media and new shows these days. They're like, oh, I've just finished this, I want another right now. And I think that puts a lot of pressure, especially on like animation studios and stuff like that, which is such a tedious art. It
Right.
takes such a long time,
Yeah.
and it's not again, it's not realistic to keep up with that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's come full circle. Isn't it beautiful? There's balance to the universe.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've thought about that too. And then there's the side of like the artists versus the companies who are just making money off of, so
Oh, for sure.
you have the audience that's ravenous for the material, and at what quality point will they consume it, regardless of, high or low quality. But I think another animation that's really 2D based, but that explores the potential for 3D's influences, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the demon. I forget exactly what it's. Demon Slayer, something like that. You know?
Oh, Demon Slayer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that one explores perspective, how 2D perspective could be enhanced by using 3D animation. So I don't really know all that much about animation. I'm just a critic of it, apparently. I know generally some general stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like seeing a lot of animation and stuff like that is can be enough for you to like form, your own opinion and gather some knowledge on it.
Right, yeah, which is where I think I'm at. So you are now in the throes of fulfilling your Kickstarter. I guess I don't know how much more time you want. I'm happy to have you on for endless hours because this is a lot of fun for me, and I hope it's been fun for you. But
It has been, yeah.
before I do let you scurry away, I'd love to hear about the Kickstarter, the whole process of it, as deep as you want to get at this point in our conversation, and fulfilling on it.
Yeah. Well, I started it last month, early October, and I finished it on November 11th this month, which was the 1 year anniversary of when I had the dream.
Awesome.
And it was crazy from start to finish because I set my goal, like I said, to £300, and I released
what guided that level? Like, why did you think that was enough?
Well, because I did like a price estimate beforehand. I was like, okay, how much would it cost me to make like 20 books? And then like I'll have things for digital copies and then just the physical copy and then stuff with prints and stuff. So how much would it cost me to make like some prints and like 20-ish books? And it came out to like 250 or something. And I was like, do you know what? I'll be ambitious. I'll set it to 300. And I released the Kickstarter link to our patrons first, and they funded it within 10 minutes. And then by the time it reached the public, it was at like, which was like 5 hours later or something, it was at like 1,000 or like £2,000.
And how are you? Like, what was going through your mind at that point?
I think I blacked out. I think like it was just it's just so I'm so immensely grateful for like all the support it's gotten and just the community that's been built around it, because it's something I never imagined like at all. Obviously, because I had one stretch goal, and it was £450, and like it was gone, within 15 minutes. And so obviously I just never ever expected it, and it's just given me such confidence for like the next comic I want to do, because I'll always know like there will be people that will have my back on it, because even with this I kind of kept it under wraps for a very long time, and I didn't even publicly advertise it until like maybe a couple months beforehand, when I was like, oh, by the way, I've been making a comic the past year. And everyone was like, oh, fuck yeah, I'll read it. I was like, oh, great, cool.
Everybody, meaning the patrons of your collective Patreon
yeah,
account,
patrons,
yeah, groups,
and like some of my followers on Twitter too. And it just, when it went up on Kickstarter and it got funded and then overfunded and then overfunded and then overfunded, and it just snowballed and started to branch out into a bunch of different people. And even you, like it just went everywhere, and it's the only word for it, and this really comes from the bottom of my soul. The only word for it is bananas. Absolutely bananas.
Bananas are delicious.
Yeah, it's just been wild. Yeah, so like I sent out surveys for like addresses and stuff like that, and I ordered the books this morning. This morning was actually my digital release. And
Congratulations. We're
thank
we're
you.
marking a historic event. This will be released a little bit later on, but
And I ordered the books, and I was very surprised I didn't get a Actually, let me check. Uh, no, yeah, I haven't gotten a phone call from my bank saying why did you just spend this much money at once? Because it's a lot of books.
even
It's
even they bought the comic.
yeah.
They know.
Oh no, I know this. Oh, fucking some lass at Halifax is like, oh yeah, my comic's coming. Oh, that's funny. No, but yeah, the amount of comics I bought, it's more than I've ever had to spend on my business. So I'm quite a frugal person, so spending money, especially if it's like a treat for myself, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. But it's worth it, and obviously it's what the Kickstarter was for. And it's just wild, just wild.
Yeah, and so today was the digital release, and then hereafter
Yeah,
you'll get the printing done.
yeah.
And over the course of the Kickstarter, how did you go about promoting it? Because the comic was already fully
Mm.
complete, right? And before you launched.
Yeah, it was finished, and I I started to promote it in just little bits and pieces on social media, like, oh, here's a sketch I did forever ago when I was thinking about the comic, and here's like the final page. Isn't that cool? And then just stuff like I've really been getting into like live streaming and streaming my art on Twitch, and I did things like I when I was making the front cover and the back cover, I would live stream my process there, and people would be like, "Oh, what's this for?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm so glad you asked." Um, so it was mostly just over Twitter and Patreon, and I must have done something right because people, especially our patrons, were getting just really hyped about it. They were like, "Oh well," I guess they kind of know us because they were like, "Well, we literally pledged to your Patreon. We know what kind of art you make. We love the stuff you make already, so I'll happy read it." And it's like that's just so relieving to realize that like that community you've been trying to build for so long is like already there and like already has your back, and it's just so much. It's so nice.
I'll
I'm
say it
incredibly
again, it's
fortunate.
beautiful.
I'm incredibly lucky.
Yeah. Um, and then fulfillment is the digital copy and sending those out. And you also had a lot of stretch goals that I think you just kept like stretching. You must be a master yogi by now.
Yeah,
what were the stretch goals?
so the first one I did was like a holographic print because I made another print design that was I was tossing up between two designs on what I should use as the front cover, and the one that I didn't use I turned into a hollow print, and that was like my 450 pound stretch goal. That was they're on the way. Um, um, and then after that, because it was like past the point of stretch goals really, because it went from like, oh, my goal is at 300 and it's been an hour now and I'm like almost at 2 grand, so what the fuck do I even do here? And I already had like a bunch of bits and pieces, like mini prints and stickers and then like a poster. So I was like, oh, maybe I could have like, I'll add some new tiers, but I'll also make like a another ambitious stretch goal, which was of course blown out of the water. So I branched out into something that I'd wanted to do because I'd seen a lot of artists do it at conventions, and I'd wanted to try it myself, but didn't really have the resources. Was clothing. So I started with beanies, like hats, and I moved on to shirts and hoodies and stuff. And uh, I even ordered like a screen printing kit for it, which
Oh, so you're going to do
very
them yourself?
yeah. I did a couple practice runs, and I was like, okay, yeah, I get this. And the good thing about that is like once I'm done with those shirts, I can just reuse the screen for like a different design that I can just sell in my store at conventions. It's literally changed my business forever.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I've just I've been ordering like supplies for it that'll help me out, stuff that'll help me with the packaging or with like producing the stickers because I do that all by myself too. And it's just changed things forever. It's so insane to be talking about it when like a little over a month ago I wasn't even sure if I'd be able to get 300 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I have nothing but smiles. I was going to say it's beautiful again, but I figure that's way too redundant.
Nothing but smiles. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I hate to go back, but I do want to go back because there was another question that, we had explored together over email, and that was, considering exploring inclusion in future comics.
Yeah.
I wanted to, just touch
Yeah.
base
Well,
on that with you.
there was something I did with this one too, because in the comic there's like a whole wealth of characters. And like even one of the main characters, Mars, is non-binary. And the one thing that I took away from writing all those different characters in was that it was so easy to just write these characters in and have them exist as they are. Because what was frustrating to me when I was thinking about that question when I was writing it to you was I think you see a lot more inclusion in media these days, but there's still a lot of times where it's kind of masked by tragedy. So like you could write in a character of color but have them face racism in your story, or a trans character and have them face transphobia. For example, I haven't played the game. I just know about this scene. There is a trans character in The Last of Us 2, which I have seen all the scenes that he's in, and I think it's incredible. I think he's a great character. I think it's incredibly well handled. I just don't think he needs to be burdened by transphobia. And I, I just thought it was great and therapeutic, especially to myself, to just write in these characters and have people say like, "Oh, what are they up to?" or like, "How are they feeling?" or just have characters from different backgrounds and they're just there. They just exist because they are, and that's something I'd really love to carry forward. And even writing my next story, that little time travel idea I had. When I haven't really fleshed out anything or anyone, but the first thing that sprung to my mind when I was thinking it and writing little details on it was, the main character is trans. And I was just like, I didn't know why I feel like this. I don't need a reason to make him that. I've just, as long as I've had this idea, just seen him as trans and it doesn't feel right any other way. And I just think, I don't know, I just think that's such a great thing to be able to do creatively, is that you can do this so easily, and it's just I don't know, it's just wonderful to me, and to be able to bring that in myself and to hopefully, I don't know, one day make a comic that someone will read and be like, I am in this, it's just the best feeling.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I like the idea of not looking at it through the lens of oppression. And I think maybe I'm going to stumble on my own words here, but there is oppression out there of more diverse groups and non-binary people and transgender folks. But by not making that the focus of the story, it just makes them part of the collective community. And for me, isn't that what we're all after in the end, is to live life together, not in conflict and not with judging each other?
Exactly, yeah. I think, yeah, that's 100% it. Because I think there are some very, very great stories that do touch on this oppression, like The Last of Us 2, for example. But I think a lot of people will come to video games or movies or comics as an escape, particularly with games. That's definitely the case for me. And what happens when you're so troubled in real life from this oppression, and then you go into other media as a form of escape, and that oppression is still there? Like, what does that do? Again, I think there are definitely good ways of writing this and handling it, but I just don't think it's necessary all of the time. And it's quite damaging if that does become the case all the time, because then people will see people of color or trans people and think immediately like transphobia, racism,
Yeah, yeah.
those kind
Yeah,
of
and
stories.
yeah, and speaking from my perspective as a heterosexual white male in the United States, um, I'm not always in a position where I'm interacting with non-binary or transgender people. And, so you're first and foremost, you're first creating escape for people who are like that and may want to see themselves represented in stories. But for me, in reading it, that helps me build familiarity with people who I may not otherwise interact with in my everyday life. Like if I was in the middle of the United States in an area that doesn't have Hispanic people, and then I watch TV and I see a Hispanic person on TV, it allows me to build familiarity with that person. And in reading Heaven's Not Enough, you use the pronouns they, and I hear about it a lot, and you shared with me your pronouns before coming on to the podcast today, but it's something I'm not so familiar with, and I apologize for not using the correct pronouns at least once during the podcast with
That's
you.
okay. That's okay.
But
Because
I appreciated in the comic that you used it because it wasn't familiar for me and it threw me off. And I said, "Oh, why did she say they?" And then I said, "Oh, okay, I get it. Oh, now I interact with it in a real world example, and now I'm more familiar with it." And I
yeah,
thought that was really useful for me as a heterosexual white dude living in the area that I'm living now, where I don't cross paths with non-binary people much, if at
yeah,
all. And so it helped, instead of just hearing about it or seeing people write their pronouns in their Twitter or their Instagram or in signing an email. It was a real world example, and it helped build familiarity for me and made me feel more comfortable that I wasn't going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, that's never what my intention or what I want to do. And so as an example and giving me that experience, through media, thank you.
that's what I aim to do. And I mean, it's just really good to build on the experiences of other people, because it varies so much. Like, for example, with me, I remember you said in our emails, when you checked my Instagram page, it says any pronouns. So you were happy that I clarified they, them. And the truth is, most of the time, I do feel fine with any pronouns, but occasionally I do ebb and flow between, oh, she, her doesn't feel right at the moment. Maybe I'll just say like it's they, them. And that just happens. And that happens to so many people. And it it's nice to be, this sounds like I'm bigging myself up so much, but it's nice to be a part of normalizing that. Yeah, because
Yeah, if nobody does it, it's not going to happen. It's kind of like the mountain example that we talked about before. If nobody takes that first step,
yeah,
then it's not going to happen. And it came to you naturally to have a more inclusive comic characters and to potentially explore that in the future. And I think it's
yeah,
awesome that it is organically coming out of you in that way, and that you don't buffer it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that you
I
don't
think
overthink
I
it.
think like,
You're just doing what's natural to you.
yeah, no, of course not. Yeah, overthinking it would be like the worst thing I'm going to do, because it comes so naturally for me because I am like living that, um, as a non-binary person. And it's like if I overthink it, then like I'm not being true to myself, and I'm not being true to other people who might read this, who use they them pronouns and like see themselves in it. Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, yeah. I think one of the things I really enjoyed about writing so many different kinds of people in that comic is that it's entirely set in heaven, and I just kind of like the imagery that so many people are in heaven. It doesn't
Everybody's there.
matter. Everybody's there.
Yeah. Everybody
It's
goes
just
to heaven.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I just that was my goal to just write it so naturally into the comic, and I'm glad that kind of became like I'm glad that was like apparent that it just flowed into the story.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And there was I love the old, I think she's an Indian lady.
Mm, yeah.
I loved her character. And then I was actually investigating, trying to remember, uh, for a previous podcast, reference point that I thought the artist's art resembled this cartoon from 90s America. And I was looking up these old 90s cartoons, and Recess came up, and there's like a pretty diverse, I don't know if you're familiar with the
Yeah, yeah,
cartoon,
of course.
but I don't think at the time I realized how diverse the cast of characters in Recess was. And the reason I didn't realize it is because it's natural. And that's also how I
Mm,
felt about your comic. I didn't look at the Indian lady as an Indian lady. um Everybody just felt like they are who they are. And
yeah,
yeah, very well done in that
yeah.
regard as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think uh in regards to like diverse casts, I think the people who do notice it are those people who are minorities because it it does work, and it's incredibly natural because these people exist in real life. You pass by them every day in the street. Well, not this year, but you do pass by them
Yeah.
like every day and talk to them, and they could be your friends or your family, and they notice when they are not on TV or in games or in comics and stuff like that. And the people who don't, I'm not trying to call you out, but the people who don't
No, no,
notice
no.
are the people who are like over represented in comics.
Yeah.
And it's just it's just nice to, I don't know, have that diversity and have it feel so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, it just felt like there are people there. So I think
Mm,
maybe, yeah, in multiple ways you represented, and I'm trying to not slip on my words or misrepresent my intention with what I'm saying, but um, I saw people in your
yeah,
comic. I didn't see types of people. And I think that's a high level of achievement in any creative space, if that makes sense.
yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Thank you very
that's
much.
a
That's
compliment.
very
I hope
kind.
it's taken as
Yeah.
a compliment.
No, yeah, no,
Yeah.
no. I understand 100% what you mean. Because that's exactly it. You're supposed to just look at these people and think. You're not supposed to think like, oh, well, being non-binary is a part of Mars, but you're not supposed to just see Mars as non-binary. You're supposed to see Mars as this character who has just died and gone to heaven and is living with like the frustrations and trauma of that. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I intend to do it more in the future.
And we very much look forward to that. We could like slowly get into wrapping up. And I have a very like quintessential interviewer question for you that is meant to seem really super clever. So,
Okay.
if you have a seatbelt on that chair of yours, fasten.
It's meant to seem clever. Okay. Let's see if you pull it off.
It's meant to seem really corny, but like something
Oh,
that
okay.
most podcast hosts would ask in
Oh, go on.
in
Oh, I'm
closing the
excited.
podcast.
I'm excited because you know what? I've only been on like one podcast before this, so I'm really getting like, the experience.
Yeah, and I'm building up your anticipation, and soon
Yeah.
enough there will be a turtle with like razor sharp teeth. So
We're just
it's from
a
the
saltwater
ocean.
turtle.
Saltwater.
Yeah.
So the question in closing is, if heaven's not enough, what is?
I didn't see that coming.
No? Oh,
No.
man. Well, I did my job. I
That's
built it up
incredible.
and then I delivered.
Wow, you're the first person to ask me that.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. What is enough? Diversity.
Yeah. Another way you could spin it is by saying, you'll find out by reading the comic.
Oh my god, you had this plan.
Mic drop. I didn't think of that beforehand.
You thought about this and wrote it down like after you wrote down your talking points with Shaq.
I was like, ooh, I'm gonna nail her here, then I'm gonna sign off.
Wow. Now that was a banger.
No, diversity is very accurate, and I was hoping to get you to, just speak for 10 more minutes, but I think that that's a good signing off point.
Yeah, I do think it's funny that because it's like 5:30 here now. I think when we started this, it was bright, so you have literally watched the sunset outside of my window. It's like we've been talking for like hours and hours.
I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and before I do actually let you go, like, tell us where the Kickstarter ended. Are you going to put copies up on a website somewhere? Where can people find you? Where can they find this specific project, even though the Kickstarter is completed? And then where can they find you to follow your future endeavors?
So maybe in the next week or so, I'll be putting the digital copy of Heaven's Not Enough on my store, which is ipkipi.storeenvy.com. I will spell the username because people tend to have trouble with it. It's IPKIPI. Even I have trouble with it. But so that'll be ipkipi.storeenvy.com. And then when the physicals come in, I've ordered a few extras. So I'll be putting those up too. And everywhere else, my socials just Ipkipi on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter is where I'm most active, so if you wanna talk to me, Twitter is the place to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And like I said, I really enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed the comic and sing your high praises in that regard. I look forward to your future comics, and I look forward to you hopefully.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, hopefully joining me again here on What's Your Random. And until next time, Kip, enjoy your random. Hello, my fellow random, and welcome to the debriefing. And thank you for hanging on tight with us after the episode here today. I really enjoyed my conversation with Kip. I think that they are a really good artist, and I said it before, during, and after the podcast many, many times. I am thoroughly impressed with their art, which is their main focus, what they are known for, but also with their storytelling ability, which really impressed me. I think if you can get your hand on this comic, you really should, and you will not regret it. Something new for me this podcast. It was my first time really interacting face-to-face, person-to-person with a non-binary person, and it's taking me some time to get used to speaking with they, them pronouns. And if I believe I may have slipped up, and I apologize for that once. And if I slipped up and didn't catch it, I apologize. That is certainly not my intent. My intent is to have a really good conversation. And I think that we succeeded in kind of diving into the creative process here today. So thank you for listening. In terms of key takeaways, I would have to go back and listen to the episode. It was all really meaty conversation, from overcoming anxiety, kind of the abstract mental hurdles that we constantly have to hurdle over to pursue our creative goals, particularly, when you're just starting out and you're trying something new. And, very impressed that Kip started with a 130-page comic for their first comic. That is a feat. So kudos to them, and thank you, Kip, for sharing, your process and the trials, tribulations, and celebrations along the way. It was really interesting to hear all of it. As far as my performance, I don't know. What do you guys think? I think I had a good time. Maybe a little tired on a Saturday morning trying to coordinate time zones with the UK. Maybe I could have not eaten takeout the night before. That tends to make me feel a little bit slower the next morning. Perhaps a good salad would make me a little sharper, but I felt pretty good with my ability to keep the conversation going in an interesting way and asking good questions that solicited even better responses. So I think this was one for the books. I look forward to listening back to all that Kip had to share. I could probably mute myself out. The guest is always the star of the show. So I think that's it. Thank you guys for joining me today. And heck, go out there and enjoy your random.